Hi, I'm Amanda Morgan, and this is Not Just Cute, the podcast, where we discuss all kinds of topics relating to intentional whole child development and supporting the critical work of parents and teachers of young children. Today, I'm talking with Julie Bogart, creator of the Brave Writer Language Arts curriculum and author of the new book, Brave Learner. You can find show notes for this episode at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 23. I've often been asked about my educational philosophies and whether or not I fit under one label or another, and my best answer has been that I follow a patchwork philosophy, and that's really the best way that I can think of to describe it, because I've studied a lot of different philosophies and found their commonalities or the unique attributes that really resonate, and I've pieced together this composite that feels truest to me. And among all of those influences, I've come to learn a lot from the sphere of homeschooling as well. In fact, I wrote a piece many years back with the title, Homeschooling is Not Optional. Because whether you officially pull your children out of public school and commit to educating them full-time or not, the home is still one of the most influential aspects in a child's education. And the ways that we spark curiosity and engage in conversations and explore new ideas and concepts within the walls of our own home will be a huge part of the foundation for our children, for learning and for navigating in the world. And I still believe today, as much as I did when I wrote that piece almost a decade ago, that if we don't choose to make our homes a place of learning, it really won't matter where we choose to send our kids to school. So with that perspective in mind, in our family, we've generally chosen to send our boys to public school. But this year is the first year that we've decided to officially homeschool 2 of our boys, and 2 of our boys are still in public school. And it may look completely different next year. I think it was in Tish Oxenreider's book, Notes from a Blue Bike, where I first read, or perhaps just read at the exact moment that I needed to, the sentiment that you don't have to make all the educational decisions for your children in one fell swoop, but you can take it 1 year at a time and one child at a time. Of course, you plan ahead as much as you can, but you have to assess each year whether or not that plan needs to change. And so far, that approach has served us well. So well before we ever made this leap into homeschooling, as I was just eavesdropping on that homeschooling world, I kept coming across Julie Bogart. And I found that even though I wasn't homeschooling officially, there were things about the ways she approached learning in the home and the learning process in general that I really appreciated and connected with. Julie is a mom to 5 now grown children whom she homeschooled for 17 years. She's also an accomplished writer and the creator of a popular language arts program, Brave Writer. Her new book, Brave Learner, Finding Everyday Magic in Homeschool, Learning, and Life, shares so many of those perspectives that intrigued me. Ideas about inspiring wonder and engaging in responsive learning. The book is written specifically for homeschooling parents, but I found that so much of it would be applicable to anyone who views their home as a place of learning, regardless of where their children officially do school. So whether you're homeschooling or considering homeschooling or just looking to learn more about how you can incorporate more learning at home, this book has so much to offer. Julie is smart and energetic, and I just know you're going to love her and what she has to share. So let's jump right in. Hi, Julie. Thanks so much for joining us today.
So great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
You know, we talked a little bit before we hit record, and I was mentioning that I've actually been following you for a while as an educator and as a mom, and but I know that a lot of the people that are listening today maybe are not as familiar with you, and this is maybe an unfair question, but I was wondering if you could give kind of tell a little bit about your story as a mom and as a homeschool educator. I feel like that's an unfair question because I know you're a veteran mom with grown children now, so this could be a very long story.
I'll try and keep it short for you. So interestingly enough, I found out about homeschooling in 1984 And at that time, I had never heard of it, and I heard about it in unusual circumstances. I was in Spain at the time with my fiance, and we were at a meeting that had one of his friends at it. And this friend walked up to me and said, "So, Julie, are you going to homeschool your kids?" And I said, "Homeschool? What's that?" And he launched into his, sort of treatise about tailor-made education, close family bonding, the ability to teach your principles and values to your kids. What was interesting is it tapped into memories I had from my very effective public school education in the mid-1970s in Malibu Canyon, which was sort of this like very free, progressive, kinesthetic bonding experience to learning. And so that combination of thinking I could teach my kids and give them a rich education like I had caught my imagination. I never turned back. So in 1991 or 92 is when I began. It never occurred to me to even look at the local public school because by then I had role models, I had read a bunch of books, and I was just sold. So my homeschooling journey started then. I ended up having 5 kids total. I'm a bit of a homie. I had home births, homeschool, I breastfed. I grew up in California. What do you expect? But in the main, the thing about homeschooling that to this day I still feel so happy about is that it created these self-directed, motivated learners. All 5 of my adult kids are leading what I consider remarkable lives, and they are all very bonded to each other, which was one of my secret hidden agendas. I was hoping that my family would love each other, and my kids really do. So I'm a big fan.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you mentioned, having these other objectives in addition to, all the academic objectives that we have, that I think for a lot of us as parents that we have those, it's easy to have those goals that our kids go to college or they have great jobs, right, or, the standard. But when we really get quiet and listen, there's so much more that we want for our kids in addition to that. Like you mentioned, the family bonding and being self-directed and motivated. And that's a really big question in any educational philosophy, how we create motivated learners.
True. Absolutely.
So one of the things that really resonated with me in your book, and we've told them about The Brave Learner, which is a fantastic read. And as I mentioned, I think it's written specifically to homeschooling families and parents, but I found that there's a lot that applies to any parent. As I've mentioned before, I believe that homeschooling is not optional. No matter where you send your kids, you need to see yourself as a homeschooler because your home is such an impactful place of learning.
Oh, yes. I love that. I love that.
So I think there's so much that any parent can get out of that. But one of the things that really resonated with me is we've, as a family, tried to find our educational path and work with the different choices that we have. You made a statement in your book that said that essentially any educational path that we choose for our children, whether it's private or public or homeschooling, that there's this element of fantasy that finds its way into our planning and our decision making. And I just really related to that personally, but I'm curious if you could expand on what you meant by it to make sure I'm not reading too much into that.
Oh, well, first of all, when you have a child and that baby is laying in your arms, the first thing that you think of is this child will have it better than I did. That's just universal. We all want to ensure that this child is going to have some kind of a magical existence, free of pain, filled with pleasure, but also with the power of what it means to be a capable, competent human being. And so I think when we add the educational task to that, either as an invested parent of a child in the school system or as a home educator, we have raised the stakes. Suddenly now we're saying, I am on the line for how this turns out. I'm not just handing my child over. I'm actually invested. I care. I want to ensure that my child has a good education. And so the fantasy I had in my mind as a homeschooler was that, my child might wake up in the morning at 9 a.m. and trip down the stairs and say, "Mom, let me at that grammar worksheet. I can't wait to do math." I mean, I think there was a part of me that just thought they would take to the academic subjects with the same alacrity that they took to their American Girl doll trousseau or their Lego building kits. And so when that first moment occurs where you realize that it seems like you're doing education to your child rather than being a participant in their learning journey, that's a demoralizing moment. Then you find yourself saying these ridiculous statements like, not everything can be fun. And, well, we don't always like everything we have to do, which really seems like a low bar for the mysteries of the universe, right? Like we're just going to get through science. Are you kidding? Science is so fascinating. Millions of PhDs are writing detailed dissertations on the tiniest of topics. How can we get a little more of that energy, passion, curiosity into those subjects so we don't have to resort to doing education to our kids?
Right. And I think that element of fantasy of thinking that this is the perfect answer, this will be beautiful and perfect without any kind of bumps, I think that applies, like I said, in our path of choosing different schools or choosing public school or homeschool. And we've played with all the options with our kids, and we're trying a lot of different things. And that resonated with me because whether we're doing, while we're doing homeschool, I'm thinking, oh, but this would be so perfect if they could go to this perfect public school. And when they're in public school, we're thinking, oh, it would be so perfect if we can just do, and I think you addressed that as well with homeschoolers. There are a lot of philosophies to choose from or different curricula that you can choose. And I love what you've said about, this temptation to constantly question and change. I mean, we want to be open and learning all the time, but how do you find that balance between, between being open and learning new things and constantly hopping from one fantasy to the next best thing, and always changing constantly? How do you find that balance?
I think for me, it's a mindset change. Instead of looking for a perfect solution, be willing to experiment with all possible options. So the idea that a homeschooler should know who she is pedagogically right out of the gate, I think is a misstep. It sets you up for failure because every single one of us knows that no matter what philosophy you adopt, there are going to be days when it is more effective than others, and days when you doubt it, or days when you're just not quite in alignment with the beliefs, but you're trying to implement them because everyone told you you should agree with that perspective. But if you can drop that, if you can see that education is this buffet of so many different items, like a big Swedish buffet, it goes on for tables, and you pick and choose based on the moment, the child, the subject, your energy level, the health of your marriage, the emotional self-care you've executed that day. If you can see all these objects and options available to you, then you're freer to experiment and find out that custom designed, tailor-made education that will work for your children and for you in this moment. That's going to change. It's changeable. I remind homeschoolers all the time that no 2 years are the same. Your kids get older every single year. You're always teaching at least one student who's in a grade level you've never taught before. You are a different person every year. Your own self-understanding and self-awareness evolve in your 30s at this rapid rate, very similar to like when you were a teenager. Like every year, you're almost a completely different person. So what you needed at age 32 to feel secure, you aren't going to need at 42. You will have so much more of a handle on things by then. So I like to help parents feel free to experiment and to be proud of that. You do not have to sign a dotted line in blood to prove that you deserve membership in a specific philosophy of education. You can sample and taste. My favorite line in my book is apply and discard suggestions in this book. And I always tell people, highlight the word discard, because we are too tempted to believe that somebody else has solved the way for us. And the biggest message I hope the Brave Learner conveys is that you get to solve it for you. You are the brave learner.
Oh, I love that. And I resonate so much with that. Oftentimes people ask, what's your educational philosophy as a professional? And I have finally just said, I have a patchwork philosophy. And it's like you said, you sample and taste and put things together. And, just like a great patchwork quilt, you get all the pieces that are just right for you. And that's not always, as you said, you've got to apply those in different situations and different, be responsive. That's just so important. And as you mentioned that you have gone through that process of sampling and tasting, you seem, as I've read things that you've written or listened to your podcast, which we'll talk about a little bit later, great podcast. I've gotten the feeling that you kind of eschew that specific rigid adherence to any specific pedagogy or philosophy, which, as I mentioned, I completely resonate with. And I maybe it's the rebel in me. I tend to kind of get a little tense when, as you say, you know, there's that dotted line signing of completely following one philosophy. And so I love that you have that blend. What would you say are some of your influences as you put together your patchwork philosophy?
Now, I love this question, and let me just start by saying I am a true believer. I'm a fan. I love being in the in crowd. Like, that matters to me. I want full participation, to wear the T-shirt and buy the mug. So when somebody puts together a community and it's got properties to it, I'm going to go in, if it's an attractive philosophy, and try to apply the whole thing wholesale, and then live up to it and honor it by celebrating the successes and pretending away the failures, because that's what ideological alignment requires, that you live up to its ideals and you hide what's not working. But of course, now I have PTSD. I've been in those communities and they turn into bloodbaths, and you get scrutinized and picked apart for using the wrong vocabulary word, or not practicing perfectly, or showing a version of what you thought the person was expressing, and they now tell you it isn't quite right, or you weren't doing it long enough, or whatever. I realized at a certain point in my journey, at an ironic point, I was just entering grad school, and I was experimenting with unschooling with my homeschooled kids. And I started to notice that I was really enjoying graduate school for its very schoolish properties. I had been studying my field on my own for 15 years. Now I was suddenly with teachers who prepared a syllabus, told me what to read, gave me these gorgeous lectures every week to savor and enjoy, notes to take, papers to write. All I had to do was follow along, and my education was exploding. Meanwhile, with unschooling at my house, unschooling, for those who don't know, is the idea that all the education your kids need can be realized through natural learning and no direct curriculum instruction. So my kids initially started out like these brave learners that they are, but then they floundered when they didn't have resources or skills, or they got tired or bored. And I didn't know what to do with them. They were like wandering through my house like nomads. And I worried that I was ruining their lives if I even interfered at all. So when I saw this juxtaposition where I was enjoying traditional learning format, education, and they were sort of floundering in unschooling, I suddenly saw that actually there were all these different delivery systems for learning. Sometimes an online class is great. Sometimes a crash course is just the ticket. You know, I taught my daughter high school American history in 6 weeks because she wasn't interested in it. So we did a crash course. We spent several hours a day using a textbook, working through it, because that was what she needed for college, not for her learning journey. I also saw that a philosophy like Charlotte Mason, literature rich, oriented to these beautiful practices for writing, that could make great contributions to my family, but I didn't have to read her archaic, dusty book list. I could pick modern books. So that's the kind of thing I discovered. I was interested in all these philosophies. I've read Montessori and Waldorf, and then I've gone the other end to classical education. And I just pulled what drew my imagination and sort of wove it together, and mostly followed my kids' curiosity cravings. That seemed to be our number one way to really grow as learners.
Oh, I love that. I love the way you wove that together. And that phrase, curiosity cravings. There's so many words that you use in this book, the labels that you put on things that just really, I don't know, woke me up, I guess, to see things in a different way. And one that particularly got my attention, you use the word enchantment a lot in your book. And as soon as my eyes landed on that word the first time you used it, I thought, yes, that's to be able to use enchantment in the educational process and the process of learning. So could you expand a little bit on why enchantment is so important in that process and what it looks like? You know, we've talked about the danger of being lured into fantasy that's unrealistic,
yes.
But what does enchantment look like in a real learning environment?
Great question. So let's start with my chief metaphor that I use about what enchantment does to an education, and then I will explain what it is. So I talk about enchantment as noticing these sort of surprises of happy right in the ordinary garden variety daily life you're already leading with your kids. It's similar to when you get to the airport and you've got to get on a plane and you suddenly see, oh, there's a moving sidewalk. I can get on this and I'll get there a little faster. And if you're anything like me, I feel like the best walker ever anytime I'm on a moving sidewalk. Like powerful, liberated, I know where I'm going, I'm getting there fast. It doesn't change the fact, however, that I'm in the airport. It's not like it's transporting me to Oz or Harry Potter land. I'm still in an airport. I'm just getting where I need to go more efficiently, happily, powerfully. When I think of enchantment in the education environment, then, I'm not talking about throwing on tap shoes and tap dancing for every subject. You don't have to throw a party every time you have a subject. It's accessing the properties of enchantment, the things that provoke us into wonder, into curiosity. It's using those tools to create an appetite for learning. Too often we use educational standards to do education to our kids. What I'm talking about is surprise. How can we maximize the element of surprise in learning? So let's say you've decided you've got these little kids and you're going to learn all about the human body. Well, it's far more interesting and surprising for a child if you have a stethoscope and you listen to the beating of the heart than filling in a blank on a worksheet that says, how many beats does the human heart have? And you look up 3 answers and you know which one is right based on averages, right? It's far better to actually hear your own heart. Or you might prick the finger and bleed a little bit onto a slide and look at blood through the microscope. These are mysterious, risky adventures, right?
Right.
They create the element of surprise. I'm looking right now at red liquid. I look at it through a microscope. Now it's made up of all these little round shapes. And I don't know why, because I can't see them with my normal naked eye. What does that tell me about blood? The goal of learning so often in school is to get through information and retain it through reading. Reading is a lovely tool for learning, but experience is also very important and powerful. And if you can go all the way to what I call encounter, having a paradigm-altering encounter with the subject, the person, the country, the language, you will actually help that learning stay lodged in the child for their lives.
I love that. I love how it really just brings that whole learning process to life, that it's, and as you say over and over, that it's not doing education to our children, but
That's
awakening that curiosity and lighting that fire. And it really creates such a vivid picture of what learning really should be about.
I have an example that I think really shows these properties quite well. Early on, when I was, raising these young kids, I happen to be a fan of poetry just as myself, as an adult. But anytime I would tell an adult that I liked poetry, I always got back from those adults, oh my gosh, I hate poetry. Oh, it was so boring. Who can understand it? Like these very typical high school English reactions to poetry. And I worried that my kids would never get a chance to love poetry. The reason I loved poetry is because my grandfather bought me a book of poems when I was in 6th grade when he was taking a trip to New York. He went to this big bookstore. He bought this book of poetry called I'll Read to You, You Read to Me. And he wrote a caption in it that said, a little inscription, I hope you and your brother Jimmy can share this book and read poems to each other, which we did. Now, just think about that. This is a grandfather buying a birthday present for his granddaughter, and he picks a poetry book for her to read with her brother. First of all, crazy town. Like, what a great gift. But, I mean, really surprising. So over my lifespan, I just took that as my birthright. Like, I should always love poetry, so I've stayed open to it my whole life. So when I was raising these kids, it occurred to me I needed to do something to help that poetry experience rise to that level of pleasure. And I was on an email list for homeschoolers where one mom shared that she made tea and cookies to study geographic terms with her kids. And I suddenly thought, oh my gosh, this is what poetry needs. It needs a beautifully set table. It needs candles. It needs tea. It needs cookies. So I invited my kids to help me prepare this big table. We went to the library and checked out, 50 poetry books because they're free and you can. We brought them all home and stacked them on the table. And while we were eating and enjoying the candlelight, each child paged through until they found a poem either to read to me or to have me read aloud if they didn't know how to read. And we simply enjoyed poetry. There was no discussion of properties or themes or alliteration. We just enjoyed it. And over time, literally we did this at one point every day, but often just about once a week, they started to catch on to poetry. We did start talking about rhyme schemes and why the first letter of every word was the same and what that's called. Eventually, we started noticing there were poets that we all loved more than others, or that one person loved and no one else liked. Then later, we started noticing that these poets fit into periods of time, historically, current types of poetry. In other words, launched from a party, a lifelong love of poetry was born in my kids. So that when they went off to college, my son was a residence assistant at, my son was a resident assistant at Ohio State University on a boys' floor in the dorms, and he had poetry tea times with those guys.
Oh my goodness, I love that.
I have another son who started a poetry slam at his college. It became the #1 attended student-led organization on the campus. I have 2 daughters who both started and participated in online literary magazines contributing poetry. So if that gives you a sense of where this goes, and then my oldest son, he is a huge fan of song lyrics and examining them still to this day. So if you look at this genesis of just provoking curiosity through pleasure, through delight, through surprise, through the risk of sharing a poem and seeing how it lands with everybody else, through the collaboration of this experiment together, you can see how that leads to a lifelong story. It's not that it all happens in a day. It's that it sets the table.
Oh, I love that. And I think a big part of that experience also calls back to the importance of relationships, your relationship with your grandfather and the relationship your children have with you. And
Totally.
that's something that I also noticed in your writing, that you emphasize the importance of the parent-child relationship in that process of learning, that that really resonates with me because I really believe that all of human development happens within the context of human relationships, that you can't have one without the other. And so what are some tips that you can share for parents to create relationships that facilitate learning, that relational aspect?
Yeah, wonderful question. And before I even answer it, I just want to tell you that the brain research correlates with that idea. It's not just a good idea. They show that it is relationship that brings the learning home. Relationship to the teacher or the parent or the subject area. It's creating those bonded connections of meaning. Relationship facilitates meaning. And meaning doesn't mean existential Jean-Paul Sartre kind of understanding. We're not talking about philosophical meaning. For children, meaning means it's useful to me right now. So for my kids, reading poetry initially was, it's useful for me right now because I get cookies. And I get to sit and page through a book that's pretty. That's enough meaning to drive an interest in that poetry experience. So if you want to set the table for relationship, one thing you can do right away is to value what your kids already love learning. Don't think about what you want them to learn. Think about what they already are showing you they love. So if your daughter is really into American Girl dolls and she's putting together the trousseau, yes, she can certainly play with that by herself and give you a needed break in the afternoon so that you can wash a dish or read an Instagram post. But at some point, wouldn't it be amazing if you sat down with her and you just had conversations about why she's dressing it the way she is and what she remembers from the book she read and what she wants to buy next and how you'll help her raise the funds to do it. In other words, relationship comes through interest in a person and valuing what they value. One of the reasons we fall in love, in romantic love, is that the person seems interested in us,
Right.
in those features of us that they think are really fascinating. That's what you can do for your kids. Fall in love with their interests, or at least be willing to risk your own curiosity. I remember when the Wii first came out, that, television console for gaming. And I'm old. I'm in my late 50s, so I didn't grow up with games. I mean, Pac-Man was after me. So I have no skill. I don't know what the B and the A on the controllers do or why they're there or any of it, and I have no interest. But it occurred to me at one point when I watched my kids over and over playing that they were getting a lot out of it, and I was tempted to rule it out as, mere entertainment, and the real learning was happening over here. Until I played with them. Suddenly, I was the learner, they were the teachers, and they had to use pretty articulate language to get this old person on board. It gave them access to vocabulary. Any school makes you write a 10-step paragraph, how to do something in 10 steps. Let your kid teach you how to use the Wii, and that's happening without you having to assign it. You could even jot those instructions down for yourself as a cheat sheet like I did, and that became their 10-step paragraph for the year. I was benefiting from their usefulness of their own language, their own talents, their own interests, and that was helping solidify the learning they had already done for themselves.
I love that. I think that the fact that the parental relationship can play such a big role in learning can be really empowering and freeing, but I know it can also be really overwhelming for some parents. I think one of the comments that I hear a lot from homeschooling parents, but also from other parents, is this concern that, can I be enough? This word enough comes up so often. Can I be enough for my kids, for all the things I want for my kids, for all the things I want to do for my kids? And when they hear this role that they can play, this impact they can have, it can sometimes feel crushing, this question of, can I be enough? And I know that's something that you speak to often. So I'd love for your pep talk to share with all these parents to answer that question. Can I be enough for my kids?
So of course you are, because you are. It's just that even in your enoughness, you're not perfect and you don't have everything they need, but you can certainly be enough for what they need. So let me balance that out. So think of it this way. You are enough when you care about your child's well-being, and then you are going to take care of that child when they're sick. But you're going to triangle in help if they get the measles or they break an arm. You're not going to sit at home wondering, what should I do about this broken arm? I wonder if I'm enough to fix it. You're going to go get a doctor. You're going to go to the emergency room and get help. So the bottom line about enoughness is this: knowing which resource meets the need that your child presents. So when I got to the point where I needed my older kids to learn advanced math, I was terrible at math. I had a very bad teaching experience with a third grade teacher who humiliated me in front of my classroom. And so I was paralyzed around math literally my whole life. So when we got to advanced math, I knew that I did not yet have sort of the good relationship or the toolkit to really do a good job of teaching this. So I did a teaching swap. I had my friend who was great at math teach my kids math, and I taught her kids writing because that was where she felt weak. Sometimes just knowing that you can get the resource for your child is the enoughness that you have to offer. Secondly, I will let you in on a secret from the other end of the journey that I think will really help you. If you do one thing well with your children, they think you did it every week or every year. It's crazy. I have these adult kids now between 22 and 31. We'll all get together and they'll be like, remember when we used to always, and then they'll cite the thing and I'm thinking, we did that once. I don't remember doing it every month. But there is something beautiful about a well-conceived, delightful experience for a child or a teen that actually fills in all the places where you've left gaps. So in my book, I talk about throwing parties related to education. And over the years, parents have said to me, oh my gosh, where did you get the energy to throw all these parties? And I like to remind them, I threw like one a year. It's just that one a year over a childhood is like 10 parties, and they love them. So the goal isn't necessarily to do a lot of everything well. It's to know your limits, bring in people to help you when you need it, and then to do the things you do choose to do well once in a while, and then get in your normal routine otherwise. But that's how you create momentum. My parents were incredible. They were these just really active, loved us as kids, gave us a ton of opportunities. But the one party I remember was for Valentine's Day, actually, when I was in 7th grade. They said to me, wouldn't it be fun to throw a party that had nothing to do with birthdays? What if we do a Valentine's sports spectacular party? So we converted my whole house into all of these sporting events, and then you paired up boy and girl, and you went around the house filling out your scorecard, putt-putt golfing, Nerf basketball, ping pong. And then at the end, we had cake, and we had prizes for highest, lowest score, best costume. It's my best memory from my childhood. We only did it once, but I think of it as, my parents always threw parties.
It becomes so salient.
That's right.
It's such a perfect reminder that we can be enough, that it doesn't mean we have to do it alone.
That's true.
And it doesn't mean we have to be 100% all the time on.
That's it.
Such a great reminder. Thank you so much for that. Before we go, I want to make sure that people know how to find you, because I'm sure, we're just scraping the surface of what you have to offer. There's just so much that I'm sure people are going to be hungry for now. So your book that we've been referencing is called The Brave Learner, Finding Everyday Magic in Homeschool Learning and Life. But there are so many other places that they can find you, and there are more resources to go along with this book as well. Do you want to share a few of those things?
Yeah, that's great. So if you are interested in the book, we have created a free 92-page 4-color companion guide. It's sort of like a bullet journal for the book. So all the activities, and there is something to do in every chapter, all the activities have a corresponding page inside this companion guide. So you could set up, a little book club, or you can do it alone, but go to thebravelearner.com, thebravelearner.com, and download it. And there are buttons for purchasing the book. The place I'm the most active on social media is Instagram, and my account is Julie Brave Writer. So I would love to have you join me there. I share all the time from my own life, my children's lives, and then suggestions for homeschooling and writing and educating our young. And then my company, bravewriter.com, is designed to support families who want to enrich their children's writing experience. It is for K through 12th grade. We have academic writing for those upper grades. For the younger years, we have a couple classes that might be appealing to your audience. One is called Story Switcheroo, where you and your child are enrolled together in this class. The child does not need to know how to read or handwrite yet. This is a narration class where your child talks and you're the secretary. We walk them through swapping elements of fairy tales out for other elements to create their own custom-made fairy tale. So that class is super popular with our kids, and we have a second one for folk tales called Telling Tales. If you're looking for a downloadable resource, Jot It Down is our writing program for pre-readers and pre-writers, and it is designed to give you 10 immersive, wonderful experiences of writing with your child before they know how to read or write, which is where the writing life needs to begin. So check out bravewriter.com if you're interested in any of those.
And all of these are resources I'm familiar with and have used. I follow you on Instagram as well. I can recommend all of these to parents. It's a great inspiration, and you are a great inspiration in sharing your story and your experience and passing that on to other parents to be able to share and build experiences with their families as well. So thank you for sharing so much that you have to offer.
Thank you. I really appreciate being on your show.
Thanks again for listening to Not Just Cute, the podcast. You can find show notes at notjustcute.com/podcast/episode 23. You'll find links to Julie's books and resources along with other interesting tidbits we discussed today. I'm Amanda Morgan. You can read more on my blog and sign up for the Not Just Cute newsletter at notjustcute.com. And follow me on Facebook. That's facebook.com/notjustcute. Thanks for listening today, and thank you for standing up for children and for childhood.